Review: Tiny Epic Mechs.
Tiny Epic Mechs is the latest game in the Tiny Epic series to be fulfilled from its Kickstarter and head out to retail. If you're unfamiliar, Gamelin's Tiny Epic games pack away into a box about the size of 3 DVD cases stacked together. Yet the modular components often fill a table and offer medium-length, fairly weighty play experiences. Every game in the series is a completely different theme and playstyle, although, a bit like the Final Fantasy series, there is a common DNA throughout many of the titles. Tiny Epic Mechs is a 1 to 4 player arena combat game. Players score in 2 ways. The television audience awards points for various elements of combat, such as damage dealt, initiating a duel and winning a duel. The other, much more impactful way of scoring is by controlling spaces of varying value around the arena at the end of 3 scoring rounds. 4 actions are programmed at the start of each round using direction cards with unique actions, such as collect resources or buy weapons. Players take it in turns to execute their program 1 action at a time. If 2 units meet on a space, they duel until one is forced to retreat, either because they have expended all available weaponry or have suffered a knockout. Tiny Epic Mechs looks great on the table. The arena is colourful and futuristically sharp, with a Tron vibe. The miniatures have incredible table presence, and this is the latest Tiny Epic game to feature meeples, custom playing pieces in the shape of a figure which has slots to carry plastic items, mainly weapons. Tiny Epic Mechs goes one further, and now meeples can now be placed inside a power suit, providing additional hit points and mounts for advanced weapons. Or the Mighty Mech, a towering robot which provides bonus points and a kind of King of the Hill style scoring opportunity. At first, Mechs seems like an odd game. Pitched as a game of arena combat, duels occur randomly, and in the early stages of the game, it is common for the victor and loser to score the same points. The loser, having been forced to retreat and therefore having negated their program moves, now enters an ad hoc mode, in which they can play whatever card they like on their turn. Similarly, while an impressive attack scores for each point of damage inflicted, finally knocking out an opponent only scores 1 point. Knocked out players either retreat or respawn, hugely diminishing the pain of losing a duel. The biggest points for controlling spaces is using an array of turrets and mines, which can be placed by the player. Having control of spaces using these items provides a huge score between rounds, and a large element of the game is having enough hit points to wade into these booby-trapped spaces, trigger the trap, and remove the controlling piece, to deny the other players their score. This is where Tiny Epic Mechs reveals its true nature. While presented as a combat game, it's actually a tactical game of area control. It is also a game of careful timing, with score taking place only at the end of every other round, so planning is required. Being totally honest, Tiny Epic Mechs isn't a game which impresses greatly from a first play. The figures are wonderful, and the first game is largely carried by the job of kitting out your little plastic robot with a multitude of deadly-looking weapons. If anything, the initial feeling is that continually swapping your pilot between the different suits is a bit of a faff. However, take on board the game's theme, and Mechs truly shines. It wants to simulate a futuristic sport and has done so brilliantly. After your first few games, you learn to read the arena and guess which spaces each gladiator will try to control. This introduces bluff and risk, potentially allowing a player to unleash a powerful ambush. The duels themselves have a 3-way paper-scissors-stone relationship of basic attacks versus powerful counters, and sizing up an opponent's loadout can lead to some explosive battles. Like any sport, it is at its best when placed between 2 practiced experts, so I have no qualms at all of recommending this game if you are able to play with a semi-regular crowd. Mechs is primarily a 2 to 4 player game, with the arena scaling well for different player counts. However, as with other Gamelin titles, there is a solo mode included. This simulates a 3-player setup with 2 AI robots singling out the lone human player, controlled via random cards from the programming deck. As a solo experience, it works pretty well, and can be a challenge to beat, but it's not as satisfying a solo game as many of Gamelin's titles. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody as a purely solo purchase, but it is a fun bonus if you're in the mood. Many argue that Tiny Epic Mechs isn't as deep an arena battling experience as others, but where I think it scores highly is in its simplicity, portability, and value for money. This is a £20 game in a small box which can be thrown in a bag as a just-in-case option, which compares to large box experiences costing well over £40, rather than, say, One Night Ultimate Werewolf or Coup. As such, and for its elegance, ease to learn, lovely toys and convenient length, Tiny Epic Mechs definitely punches above its weight, probably using a warhammer or a railgun.
Box Full of Knives. Why Dungeons & Dragons needs to step away from its wargaming roots.
Every tabletop role-playing game is a system, composed of mechanics designed around a certain story that the system wants to emulate. They're toolboxes. And as Adam Coble stated in a Twitter thread a year ago, the original role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons, known as D&D, is a box full of knives. The mechanics tell you how to fight things and take their stuff in great detail, and everything else is left in broad strokes and not supported by the mechanics. This article may look like yet another hit piece on the 5th edition of D&D, but that accusation would only be half correct. A proper critique of the system as a whole requires us to go way back and look at where it all began. Some of you reading this might have been there. I was born in 1997. I was absolutely not there. I've grown up during what could be called the golden age of role-playing games. The internet connects and facilitates games in a way previous generations didn't think possible, and the number of games that step away from D&D and become their own toolboxes continues to expand. I'd comfortably put the number of tabletop role-playing gamers who've only ever played D&D at around 70% of all players. This is in part due to the brand popularity. Some people call all role-playing games D&D. It's that recognisable. But there's a problem with this. Rather than being a gateway to the hobby and encouraging people to branch out and explore new systems, every edition of D&D since the 3rd has been a sort of cul-de-sac that people sit in, never content to venture out and try something new. Now, of course, this is just a game we're talking about here. Most of the time, people just want to sit around a table, hit some monsters, make some dumb jokes, and switch off their brains. D&D provides that in spades, especially 5th edition. But that's just it. It's a game, not a story, and not an adventure. And I have more than enough video games to scratch that itch. When I sit down to run or play a tabletop role-playing game, I want a damned adventure. I want to feel like a story is unfolding around me as I explore fantastic worlds. I don't want to win a +1 sword or experience points, but experience the simple joy of seeing what's around the next corner. Maybe it'll be an intrigue game, and my character will scheme their way to the top of the pile. Maybe we'll be robbing dungeons like banks, in and out as fast as possible, no witnesses. A story, not a game. This is the part of the conversation where someone's likely to say, but the system doesn't matter if your game master and group are on the same page. Or, you can just hack and homebrew the system to do what you want. And sure, you can do that. Some of the best storytelling and role-playing experiences can come from a game where both the game master and the group dip into books for what they need and work out the rest for themselves. But in a commercial environment, where there are many choices of different RPGs, why would a group use a system that doesn't accommodate their playstyle? For those who really want detail, there are games like Pathfinder or Rolemaster which offer a detailed simulationist approach. You absolutely know that's what you're getting with these systems. 5th edition seems to be trying to be in the middle ground between story and game, but there's a danger in being there, as it can be frustrating for storytellers, gamers, and simulationists alike. There's no denying that 5th edition is incredibly popular. It's one of the industry's biggest success stories of modern times. However, people seem petrified to step outside 5th edition's cul-de-sac and spend a bit of time learning. There are a wealth of systems with fewer rules than 5th edition, but more tools to create amazing stories and adventures. Apart from the aforementioned Pathfinder and Rolemaster, Games like Basic Fantasy, available online for free from basicfantasy.org, is an amazing resource. The generic Universal Role-Playing System, or GURPS, from Steve Jackson Games, is still going, with a light rules system and tons of optional resources for players and game masters. Less rules, more tools. One of the best rules light offerings around at the moment is Into the Odd by Chris McDowell. Into the Odd, like 5th edition, is about killing things and taking their gold. Into the Odd lays out the tools for this in about 3 pages. It's slick and exciting and rather weird. Characters often die, but those who survive feel an incredible sense of triumph. And as the permanent games master of many playing groups, having a light toolbox of a system that I can add bits to on the fly is just perfect. It becomes my own the more I play around with it. Could 5th edition give me a great adventure or story? Sure. With the right games master, and players, and plotline, and. If you want to feel like you're on an actual adventure, you have to work around 5th edition, because you get nothing but knives. Spellcasters can take cantrips that do stupid amounts of damage, and every spell is tailored to solve a huge number of problems, but most of those are combat-based. Also, the legacy of the level system is still a problem that won't go away. Beyond level 10, your average party can trivialise most threats and encounters, dominate non-player characters to do what they want, and rain hellfire upon the land. They're not underdogs, and the story isn't compelling. With previous editions, the game balanced this by making you really weak and inexperienced at the start, but players didn't want to do the hard yards to get to the sweet spot, levels 5 to 9, so the starting characters were powered up a bit as the game went on. What's left is a bit like a summer blockbuster, with a massive budget and cool special effects. It's fun enough in small doses, but can't we have something a bit more nuanced and thrilling? Of course, going too far in the opposite direction won't help either. Ars Magica is a game where you can play a wizard, spend several years in a tower working on a spell, and then get eaten by a wolf when your servants fail to protect you on a routine excursion. It might not sound it, but that game was pretty damn fun, and all randomly assigned too. Which brings me to my next point. Renowned old-school role-playing blog The Alexandrian refers to random tables as low-tech procedural content generators, which is absolutely true. The best games I've played haven't been strings of narrative tied to big combat set pieces that take hours to resolve. They've been glorious, weird sandboxes, where player agency rules the day and the game master's sacred duty is to facilitate the players while they make the plot happen. Not the other way round. And it's really, really hard to build and facilitate if your toolbox is full of nothing but lots of different knives. Perhaps there's an excuse for this in video games or other platforms where the method of play is hardwired and expectations are advertised in the screenshots, but an RPG where imagination is supposed to be at the heart of the experience? We need more forks, or even a paintbrush or two. Rules that help players interact with the world in different ways are essential. 5th edition also has a problem commonly referred to as the long rest economy. The players can take a long rest to heal up completely and be ready to fight. Common sense dictates that this should be something done between adventures as a form of downtime. Unfortunately, the rules of 5th edition don't mandate that, and I've seen many game masters have the threat and challenge sucked right out of their session when the players take a long rest in a dungeon. But surely they can apply common sense. The system doesn't need to tell them, right? I run into this argument a lot, and it holds some merit. But 5th edition is the first tabletop role-playing game system a lot of people play, and they often take the book as complete gospel that shouldn't be changed, because change is scary, and rules are rules. Many players arrive at role-playing from board games and the like, which don't tell you that you can chuck out a rule or two in the interests of fun. And the mechanics of 5th edition are woven together in ways which make it really hard to tinker and change things. The notion of balance, which in my mind runs counter to any form of adventure, stymies innovation. Balance belongs in games. Role-playing games are indeed games, as the name suggests, but the stories they aim to create are not just games and not just stories, they're adventures. And adventures are never balanced because it would render them terribly boring. The heroes should start as underdogs, trying to claw their way to some kind of power so that they can earn the right to be big damn heroes. Bilbo Baggins didn't start out as a hero or slayer of monsters. In fact, he didn't go home as one either. He feels like more of a person than any tiefling warlock or genasi cleric because he's always the underdog, getting by on his wits and the aid of his friends, which is what any adventure should focus on. A final thought. If you're completely new to role-playing games, 5th edition will guarantee you have people to play with. You'll have fun. But when you start to look deeper and seek different tabletop experiences, put down the box of knives and find something with tools that suit you. Because at their hearts, tabletop role-playing games are the most personal experience you can have while still playing a game.
Intermediate Frustration, the new Call of Cthulhu starter set.
The seminal role-playing game of cosmic horrors and plucky investigators has been terrifying and amusing players for years. With the arrival of a new starter set, it seemed prudent to round up a few players at this year's LaveCon and play it till the wheels fell off. The first thing worth commenting on is the cover art. In an attempt to make the game more accessible for new players, the publisher seems to have gone with cartoon imagery, a sort of Scooby-Doo aesthetic, a group of misfits looking terrified outside a mansion with all the glowing green bits you'd expect. There's nothing wrong with the cover on a technical level, but tonally it doesn't do the game justice. Contrast it with the art for the Keeper's screen, with the investigators tiny and frail in the light of their lanterns as the cliffs tower overhead, totally different in terms of aesthetic. I'm a pulp man through and through, I'll admit, except for Call of Cthulhu, where I try and aim for a gritty noir feel, cut through with slashes of gruesome horror. Tonally, the starter set isn't this at all. A further disappointment was the pre-generated characters. They do, admittedly, represent a nice range of potential investigators in the 1920s, and all seem to be realistically portrayed, but not Nevada Jones. Yeah, they made the reference. Azathoth helped me. I know it's supposed to be accessible, and I suppose pop culture references help, but the real frustration I have is the inconsistency. Why make only one pre-gen character a thinly veiled reference and the rest perfectly original? It's easy to imagine the Nevada player hogging the spotlight, a common problem with new role-playing game groups. If the other characters are the sort of regular investigative fodder, how could they fill the spotlight better than the famous whip-toting professor with a slight name tweak? So the tone of the pre-gens feels confused and the box art fails to inspire. Onto the materials within. I am not a prep-heavy game master. I think that trying to predict everything the players do is a waste of time, and it's much better and more time-effective to sketch a situation and let the players make the plot. If I get down more than 10 bullet points for a location, I've done something wrong. Unfortunately, the adventure booklet takes a very different approach to my usual style. The information for each case is presented in thick, indigestible paragraphs that demand close attention, lest the would-be game master miss a sentence that holds some vital information. For a beginner, this is obtuse, and even with some experience, I struggled to pass the information into usable chunks. The writing itself was of good quality, and would provide an enjoyable read in other circumstances. Unfortunately, all 5 of the cases in the starter set proved to be too verbose. Actually opening the box and running the system for the first time would be a nightmare for new game masters and players. As a game master with some experience, I found myself having to pull all the most relevant pieces of information from the cases and turn them into a sort of cheat sheet for running the game. Surely the casebook itself should fulfill this purpose. To sum up, the cases occupy a strange place on the spectrum. A nightmare for new game masters and a chore for experienced ones. Their target audience is unclear. It seems that the sweet spot for prep materials would be game masters of intermediate experience, but surely at that point they'd want to write their own content. I struggle to recommend the starter set based on the cases alone, and I feel that they present an obstacle to satisfying play. One thing the Quick Start doesn't lack is handouts. Glossy maps, letters for the pre-made adventures, there's enough to fill a tabletop, but it feels soulless. All of the maps, such as the Arkham one, seem to have been made digitally, with absolutely no consideration being given to the aesthetics of the time. Buildings are airbrushed brown blocks, everything feels like it was done in an older version of Photoshop. It's dreary and unlikely to catch the eye of new players. Maps from the Roaring Twenties and earlier should be cross-hatched, archaic and characterful. There should be scribbled notes in the margins and strange symbols peeking from hidden corners. There should be character. Unfortunately, the Quick Start maps hold none at all. My game with the starter set was unfortunately cut short, but I was fortunate enough to get 3 players at different ends of the role-playing spectrum. One had been playing Call of Cthulhu for nigh on 30 years, another was a relative newbie but had played tabletop role-playing games before, and the third had no experience whatsoever. After a bit of prep and questions to gauge their opinions on the box itself, we began the session. The mechanics are absolutely sound, and seem to follow the same general principles as previous editions. Roll 2 10-sided dice to perform basic skill checks, deduct sanity when encountering the mythos, and so on. The pre-made adventure did a good job of setting the tense, mist-shrouded tone of Arkham and surrounds, but I feel this came more from the good group chemistry than any spectacular writing within the module itself. Another strange design choice struck me as we went through the adventure. The box cover, as discussed, has an almost comedic tone, but none of the featured adventures veer very far from the classic cosmic terror of the original stories. This pleased me as a returning Call of Cthulhu player and keeper, but the newbies will surely struggle with the subversion of their expectations. The pendulum swing of tone and style is enough to throw off any beginner game master, and I'd advise anyone buying the product to either take elements from the pre-made adventures to make their own, or take judicious notes in advance. For this game master, and the players he tried it with at least, the starter set fails to get the game rolling from the moment the box is opened.
Mini of the Month, Kthalas the Elf. I have come here to this dark underground place to oppose the evil that lurks here. My woodland home is far away. The land has a rhythm, a balance that must be preserved. As elves of the forest, our part in that balance is to be caretakers and guardians for all life that grows amidst the bush and scrub. Animals live and die. They are hunted and hunters, predators and prey. That is part of the way of things. Our place is not to intervene. But the elders have sensed an evil here, lurking in the depths of the world. They have sent me and my hunter-kin brethren to oppose it. 2 days ago we descended into the darkness of this subterranean world. These passages are man-wrought, part of a great fortification built upon this land many years ago to subjugate it. In those ancient days we mustered our strength and fought the humans, until they were forced to abandon their designs. Their stone keep was left as a monument to folly, until the tunnels beneath it were taken by corruption. I do not know what lives here, but it is a blight upon all things living above. Root and branch have sickened since this land became afflicted. We hunters must come here and root out the evil, so the sickness can be cured. We left our people 2 days ago, journeying by day and night by ways known only to us. There are doorways and magic passages made by our kind long ago, before humans came to this world. We spoke with the trees and with the wind, obtaining their aid in our quest. 5 of us entered this decaying stone kingdom. At first, all was quiet, and we walked together through ruins, picking our way over rockfalls and down rough-hewn stairs into the bones of the world. Within hours, daylight became a mere memory to us. The darkness became everything, seeping into our blood and our bones. When flames sprang from the darkness and orcs appeared, we were caught by surprise. Feral faces with bloodshot eyes surged towards me, their rusted blades hacking and slashing in the narrow alleyways, seeking to maim and kill me and my companions, leaving us to die in the gloom, far from sunlight and the green warmth of home. The fighting was brief and vicious. With knife and spear I drove them from me, but lost touch with my kin. The flickering firelight and the echoes and screams of war disappeared into the tunnels until the silence fell once more. I was left alone in silence and shadow. Now I journey onwards into the deeper dark. I shall try to find my hunter brethren, but if they are lost, then I must continue. The evil that lives beneath our woodland realm must be opposed. Remember me if I am lost, for all brave deeds should become memories in story and in song.
A Grenadier cast from the late 1980s and early 1990s. This lead figure came as part of a group of 4 ordered from eBay back in 2015 or 2016. I've always been a fan of the Grenadier castings from that period, and despite their age, this little group of elves really holds up well alongside modern plastics, white metal and resin. The moulds were eventually bought by Mirliton, and you can still purchase some of the old figures as new from them. The elves of this group are part of my tabletop role-playing games collection rather than being used as part of an army. This means Kthalas gets displayed in a woodland scene or goes in the adventurer's box, just in case someone wants to play an elf in a fantasy role-playing game campaign. If you're looking for good rare models, doing a search on eBay for Grenadier miniatures always means you'll find a rare treat.
Interview Isaac Childres.
Every month, Parallel Worlds will feature an interview with an amazing content creator or personality working in science fiction, fantasy, or horror. This month, we spoke to Isaac Childres, head of Cephalofair Games and maker of Gloomhaven, the massive and amazing board game that started life as a crowdfunding project. We chatted to him about his career, upcoming projects, inspirations, and most famous creation. Gloomhaven is a deep and lore-rich game, which some people have compared to tabletop role-playing games. Gloomhaven was definitely heavily inspired by role-playing games, Isaac told us. However, he decided to stick to the board game format rather than making it as a role-playing game. I guess the idea was that I wanted to share my creation with as large an audience as possible, and I had already had success publishing board games, so I went with that, he said. He has always been more interested in the mechanical side of role-playing games. Though he enjoys role-playing, it's not his focus. This approach of using learnings from elsewhere extends to the mechanics of Gloomhaven as well. For example, the multi-use cards. Players perform a move action and an attack action, but each action is different, so doing something now may prevent them from doing what they want to do later. They're not a new concept or anything, it just hadn't really been used well in the tactical dungeon crawl genre, explained Isaac. He suggests that multi-use cards are the perfect way to add a rewarding level of decision-making to the game. Isaac loves world building and comes up with his own fantasy world settings whenever he runs Dungeons & Dragons games, so coming up with his own fantasy races for Gloomhaven just made sense. In his words, why let J.R.R. Tolkien have all the fun? His favourite of the races is the Aesthers, because their backstory is so rich, tragic and mysterious. I just really like the idea of these ageless beings that got stuck in the space between planes, he said. The inspirations for the Gloomhaven world have some surprising sources. Isaac is a big fan of Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicles. It is a meticulously crafted world, and it inspired me to take my own world building seriously, he explained. He also loves the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which inspired him to create cinematic powers for his own characters. But Gloomhaven owes its existence to more than just inspiring fictional universes. He feels that there is a lot of repetition in the board game market, which troubles him, and partly led him to try to incorporate different concepts into his own games. Most of them aren't doing anything new, he explained. In some sense, Gloomhaven was the rejection of a reliance on dice and randomness in the tactical combat genre. He is intent on continuing to create games that provide players with new experiences, not derivative ones. Gloomhaven has been a brilliant success, and he is very happy with where it is now. However, he managed nearly everything on his own until recently, when he hired someone to help with operations and marketing. If he were to do it all again, he would have hired that person sooner.
That has been a huge boon for me, he said. Founders of Gloomhaven is another board game set in the Gloomhaven universe. It's a pretty niche Eurogame product, Isaac explained, and definitely has a more niche audience than a dungeon crawler like Gloomhaven. That said, Founders absolutely smashed its funding goals. I suspect that was due to the strength of the Gloomhaven brand, he commented. Isaac is currently working on both an expansion for Gloomhaven, as well as new projects outside that universe. One of these is a remake of Restoration Games' Dark Tower, which he is co-designing with Rob Daviau. It has been a great experience, he said. Gloomhaven seems to have a place very close to his heart, though. It's my outlet for creativity, which is very important to me, he explained. If I had a copy of Gloomhaven with me, I could continue to create adventures forever. However, Gaia Project is his all-time #1 game, partly due to its huge amount of replayability. I don't think I'd ever get tired of it, he told us. Another exciting development for Gloomhaven is the release of a PC game version. He explained, a lot of the overall feel and pacing of Gloomhaven was inspired by video games like Elder Scrolls, Diablo, and Darkest Dungeon. It feels like a video game in a lot of ways, so it made sense to port it into a video game to share it with a wider audience. Though he loves those games, he has had less and less time to play them. I've been sinking my teeth more into shorter roguelike games, like The Binding of Isaac and Slay the Spire, he said. He has dabbled with the idea of making his own too. I've always wanted to revisit the first-person turn-based role-playing game genre, like Shining in the Darkness or Shining the Holy Ark. He tried to make a game like that in Flash once, with limited success. I am not very good at programming, and it was Flash, so it didn't go anywhere, he said. These days, he doesn't get much time for reading, but found the time to finish Perdido Street Station by China Miéville earlier this year. It had some pretty great world building, but the story was a little disappointing, he remembered. When it comes to films, he names Brazil as his favourite, followed by, in no particular order, Mad Max Fury Road, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, and The Big Lebowski. Choosing is hard, he admitted. Isaac is a physicist by training, but went into board game design before taking a job in the field. His thesis was about the effects of radiation on graphene and topological insulators. However, he doesn't miss that world at all. Gloomhaven and Founders of Gloomhaven are available from local gaming shops and online.
The PC version of Gloomhaven was released in July on Steam and is available now.